year is 330 BCE. Flames rise into the night sky as one of the greatest capitals on Earth collapses into ash. Persepolis, the heart of an empire that ruled nearly half the known world, burns under the orders of a young conqueror who believes he has just erased a civilization from history. Soldiers cheer, treasures are looted, statues fall, and for a brief moment, it seems inevitable that Persia is finished. But history would reveal something far more unsettling, because what died that night did not stay dead. There is a pattern in human history that most empires never escape. They rise, they dominate, and eventually they collapse, absorbed, replaced, forgotten. The Assyrians vanished, the Babylonians dissolved, even Rome, for all its power, fractured into memory. But Iran, or Persia as it was once known, refused to follow this rule. Again and again it was invaded by the most powerful forces on earth. Again and again it lost battles, cities, even kings, and yet it never truly disappeared. Instead, something strange kept happening. Its conquerors didn't just rule it, they became it. To understand this, we have to go back further than most histories are willing to go. Long before the rise of Greece or Rome, the Iranian plateau was already alive with movement, migration, and survival. Harsh landscapes shaped resilient peoples. Civilizations formed not in isolation, but in constant tension with the outside world. Early societies like Elam emerged here, negotiating power with Mesopotamia, already participating in diplomacy thousands of years before modern nations existed. This was not a passive land. It was a place where identity was forged under pressure. Then came the migrations. Indo-European tribes moved into the region, bringing with them language, belief systems, and a new sense of identity. They called themselves Aryans, meaning noble, and named their land accordingly, Iranium Vaesia. Over centuries, that name would evolve into something we now recognize, Iran. But what mattered wasn't just the name, it was the idea behind it, a belief that this land was not just territory, but something worth preserving at all costs. And then, something even more powerful emerged. Not an army, not a weapon, but an idea. Zoroastrianism introduced a radical way of seeing the world, not as a cycle, but as a battle between truth and chaos, light and darkness. This wasn't just religion, it was identity. To be Iranian was to stand on the side of order against the forces that threatened it, and once a civilization begins to see itself this way, it becomes very difficult to erase. By the time Cyrus the Great rose to power in the 6th century BCE, this identity had already taken root. But Cyrus did something unusual. Instead of ruling through fear, he ruled through integration. Conquered peoples were not destroyed, they were absorbed, respected, allowed to maintain their traditions. It was a strategy that built loyalty rather than resistance. The Achaemenid Empire expanded rapidly, not just because it was strong, but because it was flexible. It didn't need to crush cultures to survive, it could incorporate them. But no system is immune to pressure. Over time, the empire grew too large, too complex, too vulnerable. And then came Alexander. Young, ambitious, and relentless, Alexander of Macedon didn't just want to defeat Persia, he wanted to replace it. His campaigns were swift, brutal, decisive, and when he reached Persepolis, he made a choice that would echo through history. He burned it, not as a military necessity, but as a statement. Persia, he believed, was over. But something unexpected began to happen. Instead of reshaping Persia in his image, Persia began to reshape him. Alexander adopted Persian customs, wore Persian clothing, integrated Persian elites into his court. His successors followed the same path. The empire he thought he had conquered slowly began to absorb him. This is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Centuries later, the Parthians rose from the east, pushing out Greek influence and re-establishing Iranian dominance. They fought Rome not once, but repeatedly, and held their ground against one of the most powerful military forces in history. And then came the Sassanids, rebuilding a centralized empire that rivaled Byzantium itself. Once again, Iran stood not as a relic, but as a superpower. And then everything collapsed. In the 7th century, Arab armies swept across the region with unstoppable momentum. The Sassanid Empire fell, the king was killed, Zoroastrianism began to fade, Islam took its place. For most civilizations, this would have been the end. Total cultural replacement, a new identity imposed from the outside. But Iran didn't disappear. Instead, something quieter but far more powerful began to unfold. Persian administrators became essential to the new Islamic world. Persian scholars shaped its intellectual foundations. Persian poets gave it language, emotion, and identity. The conquerors had won the land, but they had not erased its soul. And then came the Mongols. In the 13th century, Genghis Khan's forces brought destruction on a scale almost unimaginable. Cities were wiped out, entire populations vanished, irrigation systems that had sustained life for centuries were destroyed. If there was ever a moment when Iran should have ceased to exist, this was it. But once again, the pattern repeated. Within generations, Mongol rulers began converting to Islam. They adopted Persian administrative systems. They spoke Persian. They sponsored Persian art and culture. The conquerors became indistinguishable from the civilization they had conquered. It happened again with Timur, and again with later dynasties. Each time the same cycle: conquest, destruction, absorption. This wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was a mechanism. Iran had developed a form of cultural gravity, strong enough not just to survive invasion, but to pull invaders into itself. A civilization that didn't need to win every war because it knew how to win what came after. By the time the Safavid Empire emerged in the 16th century AD, Iran wasn't just surviving, it was redefining itself. By establishing Shia Islam as the state religion, it created a distinct identity that separated it from its neighbors. Once again, it adapted, evolved, and endured. Even in the modern era, the pattern continued. Foreign powers interfered, territories were lost, revolutions reshaped the nation. In 1935, the country formally asked the world to call it Iran instead of Persia, not to erase its past, but to assert its continuity, a reminder that this was not a dead civilization, but a living one. But the question remains: how does a civilization survive for 5,000 years in one of the most contested regions on Earth? How does it endure conquest after conquest without losing itself? The answer is not found in its armies, or its borders, or even its rulers. It is found in its ability to transform defeat into absorption, to turn conquerors into participants, to outlast not just enemies, but entire eras of history. Because in the end, most empires fight to control the world around them. Iran did something different. It learned how to shape the world that tried to control it, and maybe that's why it never truly fell. Because the most powerful civilizations are not the ones that avoid collapse, but the ones that continue long after collapse should have been inevitable. If you've made it this far, then you've just traveled across thousands of years of history, through fire, conquest, and survival. So now I want to ask you something. Which civilization do you think still shapes the modern world, even if most people don't realize it? Write your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, stories that don't just tell history, but reveal how it still lives today, subscribe to the channel, because there are still empires, mysteries, and forgotten truths waiting to be uncovered.